Yeah, okay. So the recording has started. Welcome everybody. This is the March 27th, 2018 Rook Community Meeting. And this is the first Tuesday meeting now, and this will be the regular cadence going forward every other Tuesday. So we're happy that the Red Hat folks can join us today and some of the folks from Nexenta as well. So let's go ahead and get started on the agenda here. I shuffled the community topics and questions section to come earlier than the PR section because I think that some of the PR stuff can be kind of specific and not necessarily applicable to the entire community. So I wanted to have community topics come first and earlier in the meeting so everyone can participate in those earlier on. So let's go ahead and take a quick look and see what we have still lingering in 0.7. Yep, as expected, it is the issue with the Rook agent flex volume plugin, sometimes formatting a existing volume. Travis, do you know the latest on that? I believe that we had talked about that properly determining when a existing volume is already has data on it is the right way to go here, because the fencing and locking that we have in place, I believe, is appropriate. So perhaps using Ceph volume or something like that to actually determine if the volume has a file system would help. Is there any update on that?
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't have an update there, and I was just looking at this issue this morning where Christian posted his what he found last week with his machine, where it just isn't detecting the file system.
So is that making a statement that we've been lucky that it's worked at all so far because of that extra new line that the Kubernetes mounter just happens to interpret that as being a file system?
That's a good question. I'd hate to think we've been lucky because of that. But
is it also possible that this is somehow dependent on kernel version or ls block version or lib whatever the lib block that it's being used?
Mm-hmm. Well, and this is the only case we've heard of anyone hitting it, right? This is it just Christian, or was somebody else in the ticket too?
It looks to me the FS tab from LSB okay. That is something Kubernetes is doing. Maybe that is something not on the host.
Okay, but sometimes it's also dependent on kernel version, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, it might not be the case here. I'm just thinking why we've not seen this everywhere.
Because this code path hasn't really changed since what, 0.6.
Well, another thing to remember too is that this is the determination of if there's data on the volume already is done by the common Kubernetes, the upstream Kubernetes mounter. And there's a change in either 1.10 or 1.11 that now uses block ID instead of ls block, which I think does work appropriately. So going forward, this may be less of an issue for newer versions of Kubernetes. So that's something to look into or understand better as well. Yeah, here we go. There's an edit right here saying.
Yeah, that says 1.10.
Has the version of the tools like ls block and others changed in like Kubernetes images?
So some background. So block ID, we use block ID instead of in favor of ls block because if you have certain UDAF rules are not installed, it still interprets the file FS type.
Yeah.
And to me, this case, the block types, the first FS types, looks okay if you just run the command. So it may not be the issue, but anyway, could be.
Okay.
Wait, are you saying that block ID would be more reliable than what ls block has given so far? So this is a good change that they've made upstream?
Yeah.
Okay, great. That's a good thing. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one small comment. This ticket is not assigned to anyone. I think we need to give it an owner to make traction.
I would love for one of the Red Hat guys to be able to take this with your Ceph domain expertise.
Okay, we're gonna take a look.
Do you want to take a look, Baldwin? Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Ooh. Excellent. I appreciate your volunteering there, Rudafest. You're a good man.
Hopefully that's well for the future as well.
But bring out the big guns.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No more small fish here trying to take this on.
Yeah.
All right. So that's the only thing we have in 0.7. And, obviously we're not ready to do anything to ship a fix for this yet. So any investigation we can get on this will be good. And we can
Although
talk.
I'd say if we do have a fix that makes this more robust, we should consider a patch release.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yes, I
Yeah.
totally agree with that. Yep.
Yeah. And there's currently no other issues that have come up for 0.7 that need to be patched that I've heard of. Anybody else considering one?
I don't know of any we've talked about either. And I believe if we had found some, we would have marked them as such.
Yeah, there may be a couple in like around reboot and reliability in the 0.8 board that I guess we should look at when they're investigated more. But
Right. We don't have answers on any of those yet, right?
yeah.
Okay, and this one is it's fixed and it was backported, but it's not justifying a patch release on its own, so it can go for an opportunistic ride along if we do happen to release another minor build for 0.7.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's take a look at quickly the 0.8 milestone and project. I don't think. I'm not sure we've had a whole lot of specific focus on some of the stuff in 0.8 recently. I have been, this is in review actually. So I've been focusing all of my Rook time on the design for multiple storage backends and types. So that's a definite 0.8 thing, and that's what I've been focusing on. Is this board fully up to date? Like use one OSD per pod, is that already in review or is that still in progress?
Yeah, that's in the design doc is in review. The implementation is not in review yet. So yeah, Waman, do you have? Oh, we'll probably talk more about that PR later.
Yeah.
Is that?
I have a question. I just heard that implementation is not in review, but I'm curious. So is implementation is coming also, or is it like kind of in parallel with design? How is this done?
Somehow, a little bit history. So before Travis was here, I was tinkering with the code of a little bit. And then Travis joined Red Hat, and so we come up with the design specs, and that's follow the process. And that's why we got the two things happening in parallel.
Yeah. Dimitri, normally the normal flow or process for this project is for big features to do a design one pager up front and to take that all the way through review into completion before real work is started on the feature itself. A prototyping effort can be part of that, perhaps for investigation and research to help with the design. But normally that's the flow for big features. But I believe that this was not quite of that scope, perhaps, or we already had some idea about the design that we wanted to get started on. So I don't know if this is necessarily characteristic of the normal flow for big features in Rook.
Hey, Jared, that actually reminds me. Do we have what you just said documented somewhere and like contributing, or it might be good to kind of describe the design versus implementation process.
Yeah, I know we definitely have steps about what the contribution flow is, but I'm not sure if we directly address that specifically. Yeah. So I will take a follow-up to make sure that we have good guidance and documentation on that.
Good.
Actually, I should just add that to the agenda doc then, so that the community knows. No side notes here.
Design doc flow.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then, so I'm going to leave this in progress because the implementation is in progress still as well. So we've got a bunch of things in the to-do column still here. We have owners for most of them, it looks like, or not towards the bottom, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just taking a quick look through these, and I think we haven't been using the board efficiently or updating it very well. So.
And we're still shooting for a early May release to kind of coincide with KubeCon, right?
KubeCon, yeah.
Yeah.
I think
guess,
it's something that might be useful to talk about right now at the, at this level and that we can talk about are there any items in this list that we think might not be part of a 0.8 scope or items that we think are big risks that we're concerned about?
yeah, I was going to suggest we not try and get Mimic in. Mimic is going to be really close to early May anyway, but I think after 0.8 would be a nice.
And it sounded like from talking to Sage that the initial release of the tech preview of Rook is going to be based on Luminous.
That's true. So we shouldn't move to Mimic now anyway.
Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and then mark this as 0.9 so that it stays on our radar, but is not part of this milestone. Okay. What else are we concerned about here? I would think that Nexent Edge, that's something that we're excited about to be able to add support for in Rook. But since we're still working on nailing down the design right now, I have a feeling that actually incorporating Nexenta would not necessarily make it into scope for 0.8 and be more of a 0.9.
Definitely not for file or object. There's too many things we have to discuss in file and object.
Yeah,
Right.
I think we agree with this. I think it would be fine to have some sort of prototype by 0.8, and that's probably a good goal for us, for our team. But as far as the actual inclusion, probably 0.9 would be better.
Yeah, one thing that Dimitri and Caitlin that would be good to kind of put a design doc together around this, and if you could just show quickly what the steps are to run, like
this is something. This is something we've been working on. Caitlin actually put lots of hours into this already. We're gonna share this probably by next meeting, Rook.io meeting. We're gonna share this.
So just to be clear, you'd be able to show kind of how you would manually run Nexenta and using on Kubernetes by just manually specifying pods or. Okay.
Yeah. So we basically will just correct. We're just gonna show like basically these are the components. This is how you start the daemon sets. This is how you start the initiator groups, etc.
Cool. That sounds great. I would love to see that artifact. Thank you, Caitlin and Dimitri, for that effort there. And I've found also with Kubernetes automation work that finding what the manual steps are goes a long way towards what the code that will be implemented inside of an operator or a controller ends up being. So that's a huge step towards that progress there. Sounds like maybe we should capture that in a issue for 0.8, the design for incorporating Nexenta.
That'd be good.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think in general for large features, having a design ticket to track that for review and everything, it's just it's part of that flow we were just talking about.
Yeah.
All right, excellent. And then I need to learn how to use a keyboard. Okay, and let's see if there's any other big issues on here that we're concerned about. I assume that the whole CI transition to be hosted by the CNCF, that's probably not going to be something that's done in 0.8 timeframe, and that's also something I'm much less concerned about now because we've done our migration of to get Jenkins in a semi-permanent place for now, right?
Yeah, I think the only thing that we might want to think about is start having the discussion with the CI team at the CNCF. But that probably doesn't need to be captured here. But we should start the discussion.
Do we have contacts that we should reach out to that you know of?
I think we should put it on the agenda for the next CI working group meeting and show up to talk about what we want to do.
Would it be worth putting a help wanted on that issue too, in case someone has
experience? For sure. And I think that we might be able to get some resources also from But I think the next step is to like show up at the working group. I think they're on Wednesdays, if I remember correctly, every third Wednesday. And then let's discuss with them what the process is. It looks like the next one is the no, that's February. We should look at it.
Right, I've captured an action item here with a fantastic set of acronyms.
Efficiency.
Uh-huh.
If we could talk about what we think really needs to be in O.8 too. I think the security improvements and then the 1OSD per pod, those are the two biggest features in my mind to make sure are in O.8.
What was the first one you said, Travis, before OSD per pod?
Security improvements.
Yes.
Right.
And that's almost there. I feel like that needs, a couple of days of solid work, and it should be done.
Right.
Who's doing that? And I know there was some work already that Ilya started.
Yeah,
right?
We need to update this assignment here.
So yeah, last week I just chatted briefly with Ilya on Slack, and he said he was planning on finishing off that PR he had.
Okay.
After that PR, I didn't think about this. What's left for that? But
this ticket was really for the design, and that's done.
Oh, okay. Do we have another ticket that is tracking the implementation?
I think there is a pull request, but I'm not sure. I mean, this could serve for both, but
okay.
My part was to get the design done. So
yeah, and that is merged into master, and I've seen that doc.
It might be worthwhile putting the actual word design in the title of some of these issues.
That's helpful. I agree.
Yeah. Really quiet, Dan, by the way.
Yeah, you've got a lot to say, Dan. You should say it loudly and proudly.
I think you got me confused with somebody else.
I don't think so. All right. So should we follow up with Ilya then about the actual implementation of that?
Yeah.
I think that's on the later agenda as well. So we'll.
Yeah, and it looked like even that work was very close. So I mean, the changes there were to reduce the number of service accounts that are being used. Actually, maybe even bring it down to one, and then make sure that namespaces are created by the admin, and honor any kind of PSP policies and other stuff. So the end goal there is if we can get this, and I think for say running on environments like OpenShift, there should only be one SCC exception that is set for the one service account, and then Rook should just run. So that makes it a lot easier to run on environments. But yeah, this work definitely should be part of 0.8. It's very close.
Yeah.
Excellent. And a lot of these other things here are sort of opportunistic. If we could get, help from the community or, like smaller scoped bug fixes like this one here for, erasure coding for blocking the file system, like those things, it's not clear if, they're going to get to be, taken care of in the 0.8 milestone, but opportunistically getting it the right, getting a contributor to help with that, we could totally make it in the milestone. And so keeping those in the milestone for now makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the other big changes are, to me, the spirit of 0.8 is the multiple backend support. So, and I don't know Jared, what your feelings about getting all of that in, and adding something like Minio or whatever.
Yeah, I am hoping that to converge on an agreed upon design, and then do any necessary or appropriate refactoring for that, and then doing at least an initial implementation of something scoped for this
Yep.
milestone. That I'm still definitely shooting for that.
Right.
These actual last two topics actually converge because one of the things we eventually need to discuss is if we have multiple storage backends, we need to have some sort of way of publishing their capabilities. Some storage backends would prefer to manage erasure encoding themselves.
Yeah, good point on the publishing capabilities. I think something we should take a look on the design. Yeah. But I think all this can be also added later. I mean, we don't necessarily need to have full implementation in 0.8, right?
No, I think the thing for 0.8 that I feel like we should do is that we should definitely complete the design, do the refactoring with storage scope and storage cluster and all of that stuff. Make sure Ceph works in the new refactoring without breaking anything, and then add, experimental other backends at this point. There could be very simple experimental ones, just to anchor the design. And then in subsequent builds or subsequent releases, we'll keep iterating on these backends, including Nexenta and others, to get them to the point where they're more stable.
Mm-hmm.
And we can discuss more about what you're specifically bringing up, Caitlin, when we get to that topic later on.
Well, basically, if you have a concept of I want to erasure encode this object, it would be nice to have some sort of facility where you can essentially ask the back-end storage cluster if it knows how to do that, and if so, invoke it directly to do it. Otherwise, you use the default that works over generic files or blocks.
That does seem very back-end specific. Maybe we could take that up in the design PR too.
Yeah.
Right.
Sounds good.
And Rook really just configures things initially, and then the data path is all for the backend anyway. So. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, we'll get back to that in just a little bit coming up in the meeting here. All right, so is there anything that anybody else wants to bring up for the 0.8 scope? I think we have a kind of an idea of what the scope is looking like for the next in the time frame that's left for early May.
Yeah, actually, a couple of those things are in the Mon reliability category that Alexander's been working on.
Right.
And we just closed the the investigation around stateful set to say, hey, we're that it wasn't working out like he was hoping, and so we're gonna revert back to let's make what we had just more stable.
Well, there's no reverting, right?
Or I mean, not revert. Yeah, nothing reverting, actually, but just turning his direction to go back to those other issues.
Yeah, one of the things that confused me about that is that work was motivated by a set of problems. So are those problems? Will those be addressed in a different way, or?
I know he gave his reasoning for why he's getting rid of it. So that here it is right here. So you can at least see that and have that as a sort of focus of the discussion right now. This is the next agenda topic, so that works out.
Great, because if these are still issues with what's in master right now, then we need to find alternative approaches to them. If it's not stateful set, then it's something else.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think the deployment using a deployment doesn't specifically address these issues, but there's things like make sure we never put two mons on the same node. We can control that, and then what were some of the other ones? Seeing if we can use a consistent mon ID per node. That's going to require some prototyping. I'm not sure that will work, but I'm not sure we need that either.
The exit the mons gracefully seems like a real issue.
And yeah, was that one of the issues in 0.8, or one that he's?
I don't think that was actually captured. I think that he found that while doing his effort, and I'm not sure if that was captured or not.
Travis, do you think you can follow up with, given that you spent time on this one too, can you follow up with what needs to happen in lieu of not making this change?
Right. Yep. Yeah. Alexander and I have been talking along the way.
Okay.
We probably could have decided sooner to go back to the original way of thinking, but since stateful set wasn't working out.
So do we have a good idea of the scope of issues that we want, like the most severe ones or the ones with most impact that we would want to tackle right now before going, in any other direction?
Are you talking about this topic specifically?
Yes, yes, with monitors specifically.
Yeah, I think there's 2 or 3 that are in the O.8 milestone that definitely.
So like this.
Yeah, so 1386, not placing them on the same node is the top one. Stable identity per node, it's more of a nice to have. And then I thought there was one other one.
Those are, I see Alex's smiling face in 3 places on the screen.
Yeah, maybe there was one other one we needed to take it on, or it was involved. Or
all right, so let's have you guys follow
I'll
up
follow
on
up.
that then. Okay. Sounds good to me. And hopefully Alex will be able to adjust his schedule so that he can join us for future meetings. That's unfortunate that he has a conflict at this time on Tuesdays.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so next topic. Is there any reason to not drop Kubernetes 1.6 support now?
I think the reason remains the same, which is OpenShift tends to drag their feet with Kubernetes installs. I believe maybe the Red Hat folks can weigh in here, but I believe 1.6 is still out there in OpenShift 3.6.
And that's right. I think I had an action item to go try and figure out those numbers. I haven't yet. 1.6 was from last summer, but yeah, it has a tail for sure. I guess if there's...
It would be great to drop 1.6, don't get me wrong.
Right. It's just really the whole TPR support takes effort.
And I guess we should optimize for, next May, what the deployments look like.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, especially with doing the refactoring and defining new types for supporting multiple storage backends, that would be a definite shame to have to do, basically duplicate things into TPRs in addition to CRD. I'm just going to throw that away. I really do not want to have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And case sensitivity around them, and I don't know, all these issues that we ran into before.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
So I think we're planning on not having support for TPRs. Sounds like in our O.8.
Another thing to do is to on Slack, we've got like 400 plus people now. Ask who's running OpenShift.
Anybody running 1.6?
Yeah. And ask multiple times because, it's kind of a high velocity.
Mm-hmm. Well, people could continue using O.7 until they upgrade too.
That's true. Yeah.
That's a good point, Travis.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, Travis, do you want to take that?
Yeah.
You've already been assigned, buddy.
Maybe it means we patch O.7 a couple extra times if there are issues.
Right. Okay, cool. So then next topic, I just wanted to just bring this up briefly. There's not really a discussion to be had here, but so as a member of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, Rook was able to participate in being a organization that has students apply for projects this summer through the Google Summer of Code program. And we got, was it 5 applications, Travis, from 5 different students to try to take on some of the projects that we suggested for their summer. So the deadline was 30 minutes ago. And I think we got a 6th one that snuck in actually right before the deadline. So that we will go in the next couple of weeks, review those proposals, and hopefully we will get to have a student join at the community as a contributor and work on a nice meaty project this summer. So that's something that I think I'm very excited about.
Awesome. Very, very cool.
Yeah. And we're very, very pleased with the response that we got from the students and then, their enthusiasm and motivation. So that was great to be able to have some of that outreach to university students.
Yeah, there was some great projects too. I think 3 of them were interested in the NFS.
Yeah, 2 were about defining snapshots and backups and policies and stuff like that. So
and
that was
one around object store.
Yeah, so that was pretty exciting to see that response. Okay, it sounds like we already discussed the security PR earlier on, right?
Right.
Okay, what is this guy here?
So this is an old PR simple doc update from Pavel. And there's a question about reassigning. Alex was going to take over the PR basically if he didn't respond, and I think we can just say, well, let's go ahead and reassign because he hasn't responded.
And this is very limited in scope as well, right? This is not.
It's a really small doc update.
Okay, so I'm just going to assign at the PR level then. Oops.
Yeah, and I think we'll have to close this, and Alex can open a new one, right?
Yeah, I'll let him do that then.
Yeah. Will he be able to close that PR? We might
maybe not. Okay, there we go. Done. So it is said, so it is done. All right, so multiple storage types design. So since the Nexensa folks are on the line, and we're very excited for the collaboration we're getting from you guys, let's go ahead and open up the floor for some of the discussion topics that Caitlin was mentioning earlier. Caitlin, do you want to go ahead and take that?
Well, there are a few big issues. The first, which is what we see as a necessity for multi-tenant support. There have been other prototypes for building storage clusters into Kubernetes, but they've all ultimately left the storage service as an open web accessible service. They're just adding it to a global namespace, and then it's up to the storage service itself to protect itself. That is not generally how file or block services are deployed. They are generally deployed within a scope of a virtual corporate network. That your NFS server is assuming that everyone is part of the same domain and is going to one authentication server. It's not scoping its its authentication servers. And that's important because for things like iSCSI, NFS, Samba, etc., a lot of times you're using open source daemons to implement that layer. And they are not coded to do multi-tenant authentication. And you wouldn't want to go alter them if you're trying to reuse them largely as is to do this higher layer metadata work. That means you want to access those services within a tenant-specific network. But the trick is that to do that, you need to add a tenant-specific network to the hosts that were already selected for a different storage network.
Caitlin, is this a problem with Kubernetes or with Rook?
I don't as I see it right now, Kubernetes has not defined this solution. I have an idea of how to do it.
I mean, if you want network isolation within the same Kubernetes cluster, to the level of saying that you have
multiple
different
clusters.
But I think you're saying you want multiple interfaces, you know, and some used for one tenant and others used for another tenant. Is that correct?
Yes, but combine that with all those, the storage cluster is one storage cluster. You're not cloning the storage cluster, you're cloning access to the storage cluster.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any, yeah, I am. I do follow. I guess I'm not aware of any scoping mechanism in Kubernetes that goes down to the level of a network interface.
Well, things like Open vSwitch do support this. The problem is that right now they haven't been tooled to add a network to an existing set of pods. And what my theory right now is the pods you're adding are each in the scoped networks, but then these front end pods talk to back end pods.
Yeah. I think it sounds like this is at the level of Kubernetes and CNI and network isolation.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe we should look at what facilities are available at the Kubernetes layer before we talk about it at the Rook level.
We've had similar questions about how to deal with Ceph and Kubernetes in the aspect of a front network and a back network. It would be nice to be able to isolate those two, but that
is a similar good point, Dan. That sounds like a very similar problem.
Last time we looked at Kubernetes piping for establishing two different networks of the same pod just wasn't there. I haven't looked recently to see what
I've seen. When I looked at this briefly in the past, there was some one of the CNI plugins allowed you to actually aggregate multiple other CNI plugins. There was a project that did that, and so but I don't know to what extent that's mature or even works.
There are networking plugins for Kubernetes that can create these enumerated VLAN style private networks, Open vSwitch, and I forget the name. There are a few others.
And how do you bind them? Do you bind them to a namespace, or do you bind them to like some network policy?
It's a network policy, and essentially it becomes like a VLAN, that the people that are admitted to that are exclusive. No one else has access to that network.
Okay, so assuming that exists somewhere, whether it's Calico or it's some CNI plugin that supports this, at the Rook level, what we've done is we've said, look, you could decide where to run these daemons in a namespace that has some PSP or network policy or whatever, and that the decision of which daemons run in which namespace is left up to the admin. So if you've set up your namespaces and the binding to VLANs or network interfaces in general, I think Rook should just work on top of that. But maybe it's worth someone looking at this more deeply. The case what Dan brought up, where there are a given daemon or a given pod wants to use multiple interfaces.
Right, and that's the real issue.
That might require, like in the case of the backend network versus front-end network, that might require some kind of annotation somewhere in Rook CRDs to
right, and I think that's where this is a Rook issue, that I think the Kubernetes tools are there, but there has to be a convention about how these tenant pods interact with the storage pod. Yeah. And that, I think, would be a Rook issue, not a Kubernetes issue.
It does feel to me though that this seems like an independent feature from the. I mean that would apply today even without the multiple storage backend design. You could make the you could say it's a problem with what's in master today as well.
Right. Should I just open it as a new issue and document it?
I think so. It feels like we should have a issue around supporting multiple networks, whether it's for isolation or it's for performance, and that should be if we need to factor it into other designs, then we should. But it does feel like orthogonal to what's happening here in the multiple backends.
So, guys, I did some research on this topic. Apparently, SIG network group looks like working on the proposal at least. That is loosely based on what Intel done with their plugin, CNI plugin called Multus. And so I'm hopeful that soon Kubernetes will have it properly designed and integrated, but not anytime soon. I think it's going to be probably end of the summer at best case.
Yeah, and Multus isn't explicitly discussing dynamic multiples yet.
Yeah, well, they do allow through annotations do certain assignments to certain networks. So,
Mitra, can you point? Is there something that you found useful that you could point us at that for?
Yeah, I'll comment on the issue which Caitlin will open, and I will add some links to it. Okay.
Sounds good. And I think, is the front end versus back end network an issue for Ceph in the 0.8 timeframe, or are we okay without that?
I think we've had it this way for this long that it won't be urgent for 0.8.
Ceph does not, to my understanding, Ceph does not require a back-end network, but we're not the only storage vendor who greatly prefers a back-end network.
Okay.
Yeah, this is something that I'm very happy, with the community that we're building around here that is bringing in this networking expertise, because, I've been working on the design for multiple storage backends so far, but I do not have that networking background and expertise to be able to really come up with the right thing to do here. So the, investigation that we can do, as a community with support from other people to figure out how this can be properly supported is very, very valuable. And so I appreciate that. Caitlin, was there another big issue that you wanted to bring up about on the multiple storage types design?
I think we have to talk about some taxonomy in the design on things like, is the storage cluster providing its own, is it using local storage or a SAN service behind it? And I don't think you can meaningfully talk about configuration or steps taken by the storage service without differentiating between those two very fundamentally different types. And it also has a big impact on the Kubernetes scheduling. Our type of storage cluster, where we want to heal our problems ourselves. If Kubernetes wants to give us a replacement pod eventually, that's great. But if we're running on 4 clusters, if we're running on 4 hosts and one of them dies, we have to recover on the remaining 3 without waiting for any action by Kubernetes.
I think that sounds pretty similar to what Ceph does as well, with marking.
Ceph is another one. Yeah, that Ceph will welcome being given another resource, but it's not going to wait for it.
Right. And that already is something that happens today in master, right? Travis, Wyman, Dan?
Yeah, so having another, we're talking about the failover and having like multiple mons running and they take over, or maybe I missed the question.
The way I would describe it is that, there's Kubernetes level redundancy or high availability operations, such as, failing over a pod, or, when a pod goes down, a replication controller brings it back up, right? But there's also storage backend specific logic to, to handle replication and assure redundancy of data, such that Ceph does, like when an OSD is marked out, then it'll start migrating placement groups and things like that, right? So it's the platform itself handles that.
And we could actually
go ahead, Caitlin.
We could even imagine using both options on the secondary services. Like if we have an NFS pod, some customers would be happy with having Kubernetes restart that. Others of them would want sub-sec and failover, in which case we have to launch the two of them and pair them up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those all seem like really interesting, design points for the one pager that you'll have on Nexenta.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that does feel like the back end has to deal with that failover design where Kubernetes doesn't feel that. Ceph has a lot of that today, for sure.
Yeah.
Right. Then the other one is the layering of services. With Ceph, you essentially have two different metadata layers that both use Rados. With us, we have the file is a very thin layer over object, and they actually form one namespace. To be honest, our file system is really an object system that we're just allowing you to access with posits. But the behavior of it is really an object file system. And, we have to figure out, because that's not compatible with the current descriptions of a storage cluster for Ceph. So are we going to amend the types, or are we just going to create another type? And
it seems to me that a lot of the points you're bringing up seem to be quite, specific to Nexenta and not to the, storage cluster and other types that are part of this multi-storage backend design. Am I missing something?
I would like to think that we're unique in some of these features. I'm not positive. So far, most of the people we've been seeing when they do the file system over their object storage system, most of them have been putting the files namespace in a separate space. But there have been some attempts at unifying the namespaces.
We're not trying to. Just to be clear, we're not trying to unify how each backend handles metadata or layers file systems on top of actual storage.
Right. I'm pointing out why.
Where there's a lot of flexibility in how you both expose that as an abstraction, and also how you actually implement it in Kubernetes. And so I would hope that such design differences between storage backends, will continue to work as they do today. And I think Travis mentioned this earlier. We're not trying to do anything on a data path. So we're not forcing any changes from that perspective.
Right. We'll have a lot of issues about to the degree to which we can do generic parameters for storage clusters versus having to do, oh, you're an X storage cluster here, go fill out the X storage cluster information, and every one of them is totally different. It would be nice to have common parameters when they're truly common. But we don't want common parameters when everyone has to pretend to be Ceph.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Which parameters came up that made you...
The metadata pool. The metadata pools are related specifically to how Ceph does layering.
And is that in the base CRDs that Jared's proposing, or is it in Ceph-specific portion of the CRD?
I don't remember.
Well, I mean, that concept is in the pool CRD and the file and the object CRDs.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think an explicit design point here is that we're not, things like storage scope that define the bounds of a storage cluster seem pretty generic. things like policies, like backup and quaz type policies, could also become generic. But a lot of the things that are going to show up in these types are going to be backend specific, and that there's a fine line between both, and we should, we'll probably get it wrong. We'll have to iterate, but I do think that an explicit design point here is that we're not trying to, force a backend to do something that it doesn't naturally do or is not how it's designed to do.
And by the way, there's more split on the configuration than on the operation. Everyone converges on S3 and NFS to access the storage service once it's up.
Got it. Yep. So
not everyone, as in. Sorry, hello, it's John Spray, by the way. I've been lurking. I mean, not everyone uses NFS for the access, right? So, I mean, SFFS, for instance.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so this is part of why we're trying to get this design in early, and do it with a community of folks that are, represent different backends, because I think that this is definitely the tension of trying to create some common abstractions that don't really work, or end up on the other side of the spectrum, which is silos of storage systems. So we're trying to find that delicate balance between the two, but let's maybe I would suggest that we have Ceph at this point. I think Jared's going to look at Minio as another backend, and then we have Nexenta, so that's 3. And let's come up with the right abstractions with the right amount of commonality between them, but not and take that up in Jared's design.
Yeah, and I'll do my best job of representing what I know of the competition, but obviously they would better speak for themselves.
That's right.
Yeah, and I think that's something that hasn't necessarily been addressed in the design document as it is so far, where that's been focusing on the cluster level and how you can support multiple backends at that level, but how you expose or provide an interface for file or object and how the user will define those, that has not been really addressed in the design so far. And what we currently have in master is, as Caitlin mentioned, very Ceph specific. So I'm not sure exactly how that would look to be, if it needs to be, if there needs to be any silos there, or if it needs to have something that's more common, or it takes the same approach that we do at the cluster level, where we have a general commonality across clusters, and then backends can add their own specific properties sort of in line with that. That may be the way to go for a file and object as well, but it's something to explore further. So it's definitely useful that you brought that up, Caitlin.
Yeah. Cool. John, while we have you on, did you want to open a design doc around this whole manual control versus automated control? And is that something you want to push forward in 0.8?
Yeah, sure. Let's do that. The pull request so far had been the pseudo design doc, but now that I realize you guys do real design docs, we should do one of them.
Because that one I think has a lot of things to think through.
Yeah, and as for target releases, I don't know. I haven't got that far.
Okay.
And there was a pull request already, or was that the issue you opened and we were discussing on?
That was the patch about the pull request where it was letting you set mon count equals 0 and to be able to just disable Rook managing that stuff.
That's right.
All right. So that's, I think, everything that we had on the agenda there. Are there any other, in the last 4 minutes here, burning issues that anybody else wanted to bring up?
So one, not an issue, but a comment. I think since the 0.7 release, the container downloads has doubled. So that's an encouraging metric of how many people are actually using Rook right now.
Do you know how that metric is gathered, Bassam? Is that like unique downloads or just number of times it was pulled and by anybody?
In this case, it's just Docker pull counts.
Docker pulls. Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool though. That's good.
So yeah, since 07, it doubled. So that's very cool.
I think another comment to make here, just in general, is I think we've been doing a better job recently on in our Slack conversations of using threads to keep conversations kind of not constricted, but well organized. So you don't have interleaving conversations going for pages and pages. You have a particular topic that's well organized and kept together in itself. So I do appreciate the people using threads recently. That's been helpful.
On that topic, I've seen other communities use things like create an onboarding channel or things that are common themes in general. I wonder if we should consider doing that, but I just want to throw it out there.
Sort of the newbie channel, or
yeah, like our onboarding, my first day with Rook. What
do I do?
Yeah. And there could be others, but that definitely you could see a theme here. Somebody joins and then they have the first 5 questions of how do I do this or how do I fix this error.
Yeah, there's probably a few topics that fit into that general idea, Bassam, and because right now everything's on the general channel, which is very very broad by definition.
Yeah, I mean the tricky balance here is if it becomes too crowded in general, then people just ignore it.
Yep.
Right, and also things that come up frequently over and over and over again should definitely get captured in docs so that we have that more accessible and archivable for people to reference instead of having to do it on Slack every time.
Last week after some common questions, I went and added some more documentation and in general.
Yeah, I always think that's a good idea, Travis.
And speaking of Slack, I do have as an action item in my copious spare time to go upgrade us. Now that it's part of a foundation, we should be able to get an upgraded Slack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'd be great. I was going to look into that too, but I haven't either.
Well, you guys obviously have lots of free time, as Bassam mentioned, so I don't know what to talk about this here, guys.
Right.
Okay, so I think that's everything we have here. So thanks everybody for joining. This is a definitely beneficial meeting today for the community as a whole. So thank you to everybody.
All right. Thank you, Jared.
Bye-bye.